Chapter 9. A Soulmate Alone. Born in Poland early in the 20th century, Irene, as Reva, was an only child raised in a cultured, educated, and financially stable Jewish home. A bright, fierce, driven, and sensitive child with large brown eyes and a mop of unruly dark curls, she was blessed with a mother and father who lavished all kinds of care and attention on her. They signed her up early for music lessons, making sure she had all the help she needed to excel with the violin as well as in school. Reva adored her parents. They were gentle, sweet, and kind. This lifetime, up until she was 14, healed her in many ways from the scars her soul had sustained through her death in the shtetl. She grew a quiet pride in her own intelligence, and she nurtured hope that she would somehow be able to use her gifts to be of real help to her community. She had chosen to be born with an open soul, you see, in order to be a conduit of God's love for the planet during this especially dark time on Earth. It began for Reva with the disappearance of her violin teacher, Herr Schönbrunn. He had left on a music tour and never returned. As hard as it was to imagine all the things that could have happened to him, it was actually more painful for Reva to watch the way her parents pretended there was nothing abnormal about how a well-loved man with strong roots in his community could simply disappear. Then came the government-sanctioned attacks on the store owners in her neighborhood. She began feeling more and more isolated as she watched her parents find yet another way to deny what was going on around them, another way to accept all the madness as a new way of life. They denied the import of everything that was happening, the new laws governing Jews' freedom of movement, the abduction of fathers and sons in the night, the uprooting and relocating of entire neighborhoods into crowded ghettos. All of it. Because of her parents' refusal to see, Reva became the watchful adult. The last straw for her was when their rabbi was shot down in the open street after services at temple, simply for not removing his tallis and yarmulke before entering a public place. Reva's open soul and her common sense would not allow her to join her parents in their denial. She felt she had to do something to make a stand. Enraged, panicked, and desperate, Reva went to a neighbor and obtained false papers for her parents. She decided to send them out to her cousin's home in the country, where she was convinced that, if worse came to worst, they would be able to survive living off the woodlands. Reva chose to remain. Since she was 16 at the time and very close with another relative who agreed to look after her, her parents accepted the plan. On the day she took them to their train, she returned to the ghetto to find utter desolation. Soldiers had come during that brief time and rounded up the people who'd made up her neighborhood. They were among the first group to be taken to the camps. Anyone who had resisted had been shot. Bodies lay in doorways, in the streets, and in the halls of the apartments she frantically searched for survivors. Reva finally found a little fair-haired boy, Feil, quietly sobbing in a basement storeroom where he had managed to find safety. She gently led him out into the yard behind her building and into a garden shed. Feil was one of Reva's favorite neighborhood children. He'd often sat outside her apartment on the front steps, listening as she practiced her violin. Feil's parents had helped Reva obtain the false papers for her parents. The soldiers who had come that day knew his father was involved in this kind of work. They had slaughtered Feil's entire family, his mother, father, and 5 sisters. Feil had heard their screams from the backyard, where he had first hidden when the attack began. Reva had seen his family in her frantic search for survivors, and she could tell by the look on his face that he knew they were gone. Reva sat with Feil in the garden shed until he stopped shaking, holding him gently while he fell asleep. She left him and went upstairs to his apartment, where she found him some clothes. She took his mother's wedding ring for him in case the world ever righted itself and he ended up with a future. She also took his father's tallis. After she'd gathered up what she could, she knelt by the sides of his slain family members, folded their hands on their breasts, and said the prayers for the dead. Before leaving, she whispered to them, "May your souls know peace. I have Feil. You live on in his courage." When Reva got back to Feil, she found he had awoken and, seeing her gone, had begun to sob again in terror. She did her best to calm him. After he was quiet, she brought out his father's tallis and his mother's ring. To comfort Feil, Reva told him how she had watched his father pray in temple many times, how she'd watched his mother make noodles for Sabbath dinner and pray over the candles. She told him his parents were brave and good, and he must always remember them. Feil looked at her and swallowed hard before saying, "I would like to make my papa's tallis a flag to carry with me when we run away. We are going to run away from this bad place, aren't we, Reva?" Reva got very quiet. It broke her heart to hear his desperate plea for escape. She could hardly bear the thought of using the tallis as a flag. To use it that way symbolized the fact that her world had been destroyed. But at that point, Feil's well-being became her greatest concern. She knew he would need tremendous courage to survive, and she couldn't deny him this one simple request. They would make a flag, she told him, to remind them of the love Feil's family was sending them from heaven. But she warned Feil that the flag was a secret that could come out only at night, because they needed to reach safety and reach it quickly. Something inside Reva told her the soldiers would be returning the next day to clean away the dead, take possession of whatever spoils they wanted, and kill any survivors they had missed. In the middle of the night, she bundled Feil into a wheelbarrow along with their meager supplies and headed toward the country. They walked, in all, for 7 months. Wisely keeping to themselves, not even mixing with other refugees, they slept in barns and begged for or scavenged for food where they could. Reva poured every ounce of her energy into making 8-year-old Feil as comfortable as possible. She had managed as best she could all that time, but winter was approaching quickly, and she knew they would not stand a chance of surviving if they didn't make it to a border and to safety by then. Reva had heard some of the other refugees speak of a priest who was willing to trade jewelry or other valuables for simple clothing and food. She took the last pieces of her mother's fine jewelry to him to get some clothes for Feil, a map of the area they were nearing, and a month's supply of hard bread and moldy cheese to help them through. Then she and Feil set out on the road for the border Poland shared with Russia. One afternoon they got on a local train to rest their legs and take a rare ride through the next few towns that lay closer to the border. Despite her bone-weary exhaustion, Reva had enough wits about her to keep track of which train stops were most likely to have searches. It was of the utmost importance that she remain aware enough to get off the train before they passed even one of these towns. Unfortunately, 2 soldiers entered the train a stop earlier than she'd anticipated. When she saw them, she froze in terror, trying her best to act normally as the soldiers focused their attention on them. Feil began whimpering in fear. Without thinking, perhaps for the first time in months, Reva slipped up and spoke to Feil in French, which was the language she had shared with her mother during her most troubled times as a young girl. This immediately marked her as a cultured, educated person and not the Polish peasant she'd been attempting to pass herself off as. The soldiers demanded to see papers she did not possess. When she was unable to comply, they grabbed the fair-haired Feil from her and took him, screaming, from the train. They assumed the fair-haired boy was Irene. Reva would find out later in heaven that Feil had been sent to the family of a local Nazi sympathizer who put him to work on a farm in exchange for sparing his life. Reva, however, dark-eyed and dark-haired, was pulled from the train and told she would be useful to the cause as a translator for the German army. She knew that translating was not all they would ask of her. She spat at these soldiers, offering her life in exchange for the one thing she would rather die than do. She called them pigs and inhuman traitors to humanity, swearing fiercely that they would never get her to serve them. The soldiers looked at one another for a moment. In silent agreement, they dragged her through the snow to a remote corner of the woods. Reva did not make this an easy decision for them. She bit their hands, kicked, and screamed at the top of her lungs. They hit her, punching her in the face again and again in an effort to silence her, but still she would not yield. As they tore at her clothes and forced her down onto the snow, as they held her down and raped her, Reva shouted Jewish prayers at them. She claimed a victory of her soul over theirs and continued praising the love of God over hate right up until the instant they emptied their pistols into her. Reva lay dying in the snow for some hours after the soldiers left her. The despair in her soul had sapped her strength completely, and she was too tired and wounded even to let go of her own life force and make her crossing. Her angels in heaven saw her suffering and were searching frantically for a way to help her find release and come home. They finally hit on the idea of asking Herr Schönbrunn to bring her over with the music in his soul. He trembled at even considering opening his soul to communion with Reva as she lay dying. His death at the beginning of the Holocaust had been brutal. He had reached some sense of peace and safety within his own being only after a great deal of healing in heaven. To open to Reva in love and compassion now would remind him of his aching pain. But there was no way he could abandon her. He opened his soul to hers and allowed the pain in her soul to commune with his memory of a favorite Mozart concerto that held all the beauty of spring within its notes. Lying there in the snow, frozen and in searing pain, Reva suddenly remembered this concerto. As the memory of the notes moved through her, its joy and comfort opened her heart. The music helped Reva let go. She arrived in heaven along with many others, all of whom were bruised nearly beyond their capacity to heal. The same wave of cruelty and denial we'd initially seen in our shtetl lifetime was now reaching a crescendo on earth.